Hi, my name is Shay Stanley, and this is my companion video for my Animation MMFA candidacy review. Uh, First off, I'd like to thank you for taking your time to review this submission packet. As far as my thesis goes, and there are a number of things I'd like to investigate in it. First off, we know that social media has changed the way that stories are told. Stories are told in an instant, in a moment. Seconds of video posted to a Twitter or Instagram account travel far and fast and tell moments, tiny little fractions of stories. Sometimes with positive results and sometimes with negative results. But fundamentally, storytelling has been changed by social media. I grew up as a kid in the pre-internet, pre-videotape, pre-DVD, pre-cable era, and my earliest memories are of animation. In particular, my first memory is of a scene in Disney's '73 movie Robin Hood, where the characters are marching across the bottom of the screen of the opening credits to Roger Miller's Whistle Stop. And that is the first memory I have, is of seeing those characters marching across the bottom of the screen. That's influenced my creative life from that day, probably. But growing up in that era, that's how I remembered movies as moments, scenes, just whatever I could manage to swirl away in my brain. Those scenes and moments from movies and animation were what allowed me to relive those stories in an age where nothing was on demand and you might have to wait 5, 6, or 7 years or more to see a movie again if it was re-released in the theaters. So a lot of the times, just those little fragments of those films helped me to relive those stories. And that's, I think, similar to what we're seeing today with social media. Fragments of stories, just little moments, become very impactful and stick with people and inform what people think and what people believe. And sometimes you don't get the full story. You build your opinion based on that little fragment. Sometimes you will later find the full story, a longer video or something that will inform that little moment of storytelling a little more. And so that's what I'm really going to try to investigate with my thesis is how can we tell stories in those short little bursts of 3 to 4 to 6 seconds of an animated short, of an animated film, and can something meaningful and something that is truly story be presented in those moments. But what I'd also like to do is I'd like to take those moments and build on and create a larger story. As a person of faith, I'm interested in how we tell stories of faith. So what I would like to do is see if there's a way with using these short micro animations that I can piece together a few stories from the Bible in these short little moments that play out as stories individually, but when seen in order, in context, that they deliver the message or the meaning of those three particular stories. So that's really my goal with this thesis, is to think about, how short can a story be, and how powerful can the message of that story be when condensed down to seconds, 4, 3, 4, 6 seconds. So that's really what I'm wanting to do here, is and just investigate that idea that storytelling has changed, and how do we take stories that we all know or that are well known, and how do we rethink them for this new manner of storytelling in which we get bits and pieces here and there. And so that's the gist of what I want to do with my thesis. Storytelling presented through the lens of social media has become an important influencer in modern culture. Storytelling driven by social media travels far and fast, and at times wielding immediate influence with great reach. The embrace of micro animations and social media as a delivery format will allow filmmakers to present stories of faith in a way that takes advantage of modern trends towards ultra short form storytelling. In my thesis, I plan to examine how filmmakers can create impactful work by adopting the short form storytelling techniques that we find common in social media. The thesis will focus on stories of the Christian faith and how they can be retold and presented through the lens of social media to a modern audience, and try to examine whether they're more impactful that way. I'll embrace several different design aesthetics, storytelling techniques, and production methods to give each story its own individual style, look, and feel, and its own individual presentation. Each of the stories will be comprised of anywhere from 5 to 10 short micro animations. These are 3 to 6 second animations that will present a moment of story. When compiled and viewed in order, these micro animations will make up the animation that presents the narrative of its particular story from the Bible. The use of these micro animations to tell stories will force me to really think about creating the most clear and concise imagery and animation possible. The use of Christian iconography will support this, the use of color, the use of sound. All these things become extremely important when dealing with such short little bursts of animation. 3 to 4 seconds, a score for a 3 or 4 second animation will be a challenge, but it will be necessary. And then how do you score them in a way that they all feel unified when played together or viewed in sequence? In terms of the statement of visual works for this thesis, um, as I said, each story will have its own aesthetic that drives it. The three stories I'll be telling are the creation stories, the crucifixion story, and the story of the three Hebrew children. Each of those will have their own distinct look. The creation story is meant to be presented from the viewpoint of a creator looking at a heads-up display. So it's a more modern take on that idea, using a visual that we've become very attuned to as moviegoers. From Tony Stark's Iron Man heads-up display to something like Ready Player One, we see and we know the idea of this heads-up display, and we know that well. So I want to use that as a means to tell the story of creation in a way that maybe we haven't seen it displayed before. For the crucifixion story, as that's the story of Christ's last few hours of humanity, I want to present that in a way that feels very handmade. You know, hand-drawn animation, maybe possibly combined with 3D sets that evoke a sort of hand-drawn or hand-carved look, something that feels made, something that feels like it's tangible. I guess the references to that would be things like marionettes and puppetry, stop motion animation, and folk wood carvings. Those are the textures and imagery that I really plan to try to utilize to make that sequence feel reverent for the story. I want to make sure that it has the reverence that that story requires. So that's my approach to that sequence. The sequence for the three Hebrew children, there's a sort of magical quality or mystical quality to the idea that as they are thrown into the furnace, the fourth mysterious figure is there to protect them and sees them through their ordeal without harm. That feels very magical as a story point. So what I'd like to do with that is do that in a 2D or maybe 2.5D style that evokes the look of Cartoon Saloon, the works of Disney concept artist Ivan Earl. There's a magical quality to his work, that his work on Sleeping Beauty, and his personal works, that I feel fits that pretty well. I also obviously want to look at ancient Hebrew art and find ways to incorporate that into the design aesthetic of that particular short. I've started some of my pre-production art on this project. Again, I've got 3 different stories that have to all be designed and be conceptualized, and I have a lot of concept art to create for those 3 stories, because again, they are all distinct visually. The one I focused on the most at the start is the crucifixion story, as I feel like that's the one that requires the most kind of reverence for the story and what it is, and also it's the one that has maybe the biggest challenge, as I'm trying to tell that story, to kind of talk about Christ's last hours of humanity on the planet, and so I want the animations to feel really kind of hand hewn, whether it's in hand drawn 2D, or stop motion, or some 3D that is created to feel and look like stop motion, or maybe there's somewhere in between. I'm still kind of sussing that out and trying to determine exactly the approach I want to take to that. Right now, my hand-drawn sketches, my 2D sketches, are the ones that seem to be working the best. So that's probably, I'm going to let that drive a lot of that. So I do have a lot of production design to do to make sure these all feel like their own pieces. So that's a big challenge that I've got coming up with this project. Okay, so for my production schedule, I've given myself about 9 months to get through this. I'm planning on producing approximately a minute and 30 seconds of animation, 30 seconds for each of the sequences, and within those, series of 5 to 10 second animations. So I feel like 9 months will allow me to approximately allocate 3 months to each of those 3 sequences. Thank you for taking the time to review all the materials, and I hope I've been able to give an insight into what my overall goal is with this project. I'm extremely excited about it. I'm really invested in it now at this point. I've got a lot of things I want to try, a lot of things I want to experiment with in terms of style and storytelling technique, and I think this project really will lend itself to that. So I'm anxious to get right into the production of it. Again, thank you for your time, and I hope this has answered any questions you may have about my thesis project. Thank you.